So it's showing us that we have several changes here. Here's our first one, our second one. If we scroll down, we have a third, a fourth, and a fifth. These all actually look like they're pretty close to one another. And if we scroll down, we see a sixth, seventh, and eighth here. So let's review these changes. I'm going to scroll back up to our first changes here, which are in the form. And these changes actually have to do with the fact that when we submit a form, because it might not go through because we get errors, we want to populate those inputs with the values that the user input earlier. And so we're using a technique that we used in some of our previous examples in this collection to put that value back into the input using the value attribute. So if we scroll over here, you see what we've added is value equals, and we have an opening double quotes for the value, a single quote to end this string here, and then we're using a ternary operator here to check to see if there's any value for the first input. And if there is, what we're going to do is add that value in right here for the value attribute. Now, if any of that sounds confusing, maybe you don't know what a ternary operator is yet, go ahead and review some of the previous videos in this collection and then come back. So we just repeat this technique for each one of the inputs here to make sure that we're adding a value back in if the user submitted one. Okay, I'm going to scroll back over to the left here. Our next modification here is just an extra line after the isSetGetAction here. Now this was just a formatting correction that was made between our old version and our new one. And let's scroll down to the next set of changes. So this is the case of add. This is run after the form gets submitted. What we did in our previous version was loop through each one of the inputs and run it through MySQL real escape string to make sure to guard against any SQL injection attacks. And then we pulled them all together and created our SQL statement. This time, however, we want to validate some of the information before we actually run the query that submits the information into the database. So what we'll do is start with an empty errors array. And now this is an array that we can check to see whether there have been any errors in the form. When we find a problem, we'll add an item to this errors array, and then later on we'll render it as a list. We can also check this later, and if it's empty, that means that there have been no errors, and we can go ahead and continue with the submission of the form. Now after this point, we run through a set of validations. First, we check to see any entries that need to be existing in order to submit the form. Next, we check to make sure that a couple of the inputs are numbers and not characters. Next, we look for alphanumeric validation for the username and password. We're just making sure that they're not using spaces or dashes or apostrophes or anything like that. And if we scroll down here a little bit more, we're going to do one more check to see the uniqueness of the username. And then just like I mentioned before, we'll check to see if there are any errors and we'll add a notice if there is. And if not, we'll go ahead and run through the processing. And that's the bulk of the changes. Now I'm going to jump back to our editor so we can look at these various validation pieces of code with syntax highlighting, which is a whole lot easier to read.